Hi everyone, it's Katie, and today I wanted to just sit and chat to you about some of the thoughts and feelings I had with the Gill Tarot coming back out on the market. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you will know that this is, for me, what a lot of people will call their soul deck. This was kind of a deck that I saw right at the beginning of me getting back into tarot. I saw it online, and it was like the second I laid eyes on it, something just moved within me and told me that this was my deck. I don't know how else to explain it, and I just knew that this was a deck for me, and that it wasn't just a deck that I would like. It was me. It was for me, which sounds ridiculous, but that's just how I felt, and that is how I've experienced since I got it. It came to me in a very amazing way. I got it in a trade train, which I traded something much less valuable for this. And as soon as I pulled it out, it was one of those moments where it just touched me, and it spoke to me, and it taught me, and all of the things, all of the things. And so I've kind of often shared this deck with you guys, and it was out of print for quite a while. And at first, to be perfectly honest, I had a lot of people being like, that was a weird deck, that's an ugly deck, it's not for me. And I was like, okay, whatever. But I think, over time, I don't know whether it's because the 90s are kind of back in or what, but people kind of started getting back into this idea and emailing US Games, and they've reprinted this. And so a lot of people have their hands on what for a while kind of felt like a bit of a individual experience for me. I think in this community, I know a couple of people have this deck, but at least as far as like the YouTubers in our community concerned, very few, if any, have spoken at all, or definitely not at length, about this deck. I think I've seen in a lot of the comments, even just on other people's videos, about how people kind of see this as Katey's deck. Because this is a deck that I've spoken about for a long time, that I've loved for a long time, and I haven't just loved, like, I've been very gushy about. So it's been an interesting experience with this deck being reprinted, and so I just wanted to kind of explore some of those thoughts and feelings that I had with the reprinting of this deck with you. So some of these thoughts and feelings are maybe not the purest thoughts and feelings, but they're things that popped into my head. Yes, they had to be questioned and things, but I also just want to be honest with you with all of those thoughts and things. So the first thought that I had was actually not a very positive one. And it was kind of this weird possessiveness for a moment there. But then that quickly switched over to apprehension and nervousness of whether people would like it or not. Because then, I mean, I felt possessive originally, but then I felt like protective of it. Like, it has meant so much to me, and I was so scared that people would get it and not appreciate it or not understand it, and that it would just be like tossed aside. Or I was even a bit nervous that people would be like messaging me being like, what the fuck were you thinking? This is a stupid deck. Like, I was having all those thoughts of just like, what if people don't appreciate it? I was so nervous about people not appreciating it and it being kind of like trashed. And I was really scared that that would happen to my beautiful Gill Tarot. I was like, no, you can't say those sort of things. So I was really apprehensive about what the community's reaction would be. And I felt the need almost to like defend it before it even came out. I was really nervous. And I know I actually did get quite a lot of messages because there was some delays with the printing. And it was strange because some people kind of assumed that I was like this spokesperson for the deck. And so they were messaging me, emailing me, asking me when the deck would be printed, when it would be ready. And I'm like, I have never spoken to anyone at US Games. And yet it was like these weird questions being thrown at me. So I was nervous that then it would be up to me to defend the deck if for some reason the community didn't appreciate it for how wonderful of a deck it really is. As far as I'm concerned, I'm a little bit biased. I was also nervous that they would change the deck, and I don't think they have. I haven't seen a new copy. I'm wondering if they've changed the saturation slightly, or whether it might just be the video quality, but I've seen some videos and photos and things, and it does look a little bit more saturated than mine does, so I'm not sure whether that's the actual deck or whether it's, photos and video quality. But I was nervous that they would change the deck and kind of change its nature in, more ways than they really should. But a little saturation change, whether they've done that or not, I'm not sure. But a small change like that I wasn't concerned about. I was more concerned that they would change some of the cards or change the backing or do a different book, or I was just worried that they would change it too much and basically turn it into something that it wasn't. And then finally it was released. And those brought a whole range of other emotions to the table. Still, I felt a little possessive of seeing all these videos and stuff coming out of this deck that had largely been just for me in the community. As I said, I'm not thinking that I'm the only person in the world who had this deck, but I think I was the most visible person with this deck, at least in the community that I exist within. And so all of a sudden it was kind of everywhere for a little bit, and it felt strange seeing this deck that for so long had been largely just for me. All of a sudden it wasn't. And so that was a strange emotion. I don't really know what that emotion was. I suppose there was a level of possessiveness of, that's my deck, that's mine. There was a level of that, but I think beyond that, there was also a sense of inadequacy that kind of showed up out of nowhere. This came when people started talking about the deck in more detail. And kind of exploring what the deck meant to them. And one example was Brian, I always call him McCormack, Brian Cormack Carr, maybe? Brian McCormack. I'm just going to call him Brian McCormack. It's not Brian McCormack. Brian made a video kind of really exploring the symbolism and the structure of the deck, which I'm aware exists, but I have very actively chosen not to really pay attention to. I have the book and I've kind of flicked through it a few times. I actually did a reading at one point on whether I should be studying the deck harder and whether I should be focusing on the book. And ultimately my reading didn't tell me what to do, but it definitely told me what the two options, what they looked like in terms of the paths that I would take with this deck. One was that, yeah, there's a lot of stuff for you to sink your teeth into, but doing that will change your relationship with the deck. It will become more of an academic study, a more practical, esoteric sort of a thing, a more earthly thing, I suppose, in some ways. A more tangible thing, a thing that was, you get your head around it, you learn about it, you study it. Whereas if I was to continue being a lot more intuitive with it as I had been, that was more of a spiritual practice for me, and more of a soulful practice. And so I chose the latter. I chose the soulful one. And so even though I know all of this structure and symbolism and all of these things are so embedded in this deck is brilliantly put together as far as I'm concerned. Again, a little biased. I've decided very actively not to dive into all of that. Like, I know enough, but I haven't dived in the same way that other people who are interested in more of the occult stuff might. And so people like Brian were starting to put out these videos really exploring the potential depths of this deck. And one part of me was just like, wow, like awe. And the other part of me was like, fuck, maybe my relationship isn't good enough. Like, here I am saying that this is my deck, this is my soul deck, and I haven't explored all of this, not properly, not fully. And so it was this weird thing of going from feeling possessive to feeling nervous to then feeling possessive all over again in a new way, and then feeling a little like I wasn't good enough, like my relationship with this deck, maybe it wasn't as good as I thought, or maybe I wasn't bringing to the table as much as I should be with this deck. I also felt possessive in the sense that there were a few people I watched who said things about the deck that I know that I have said, like almost word for word, pretty close to word for word. And I know that, we hear things and we don't remember where they all come from, and we, take all in things in the world, and then we say things, and sometimes they sound very similar to things that we've heard, and that's just how our brains work, and it's fine. But I remember feeling that possessiveness, not only around the actual physical deck, but about my experience of it too. And when I'm saying all of this, like, it's not like I'm actively true, like, I don't think all of these things are true. They're just emotions that pop up, and when you're like, hey, what is that? What is that? And you have to think about it, like, that is this video is those emotions popping up and me going, hey, what the hell is that? That's not reality. Like, I know that these things are not true. I'm just I think it's interesting to explore this. Now, of course, that it's kind of settled down a little bit, the people who wanted the deck have the deck. Some people have decided they love it. Some people have decided that they don't. I'm feeling a lot more okay about it all. Like, I have a lot fewer of those strong feelings. Now I'm just I'm just glad that it's out, and that people have an opportunity to connect with it. Because for me, it's been such an important and powerful deck. And so I'm glad that other people have the opportunity to have as a powerful as experience as I have had, because I don't think anybody's going to have the same experience that I've had. I don't think any of us will ever have these same experiences as each other. So it's not that I'm glad other people get to experience this deck in the same way. I'm just aware of how wonderful this deck can be, and so I'm glad that other people have the opportunity to experience their own piece of that now. And so now kind of seeing, you know, people like Brian talk about the deck and really giving it the time and energy that it deserves, you know, acknowledging that there's so much depth to this deck, and not only just acknowledging it and being aware of it, but believing that this deck is so valuable to actually spend that time with it and the energy with it, I think is the biggest compliment ever that you could give to a creator and a deck. So that just totally, I just think that's really special, and I love that. Whether this deck becomes like a long-term thing for people or not, or whether people end up loving it as much as I do or not, I don't really care about that anymore. I'm just glad that it's out there, and I hope that, you know, ultimately I don't know what Joe Gill's doing these days, but I hope that having it back out in the world means something to her, whether monetarily or just emotionally. I also hope that having this deck out there, that it's a really quite a unique deck. It's an unusual deck, not only just in terms of its structure, like we've spoken about, and in terms of, you know, its influences and how it represents those influences, but also just in terms of the card depictions themselves. Like these pip cards in particular are really unusual. I don't know of any other deck that has cards that look like this. And so I love that there's different options out there, and hopefully, I don't know how successful this deck has been in terms of sales for US games this time around, but maybe having this deck out there will kind of, I don't know, whether it inspires the next generation or just kind of gives a little bit of authority to publishers and reminds them that, you know, we don't just need a bunch of Rider-Waite-Smith clones. Rider-Waite-Smith clones are great, but I think taking some risks with some decks is also something really exciting. And sure, maybe it doesn't always pay off, but, you know, I think we need those risks in the tarot world in order to keep tarot alive and interesting. Tarot is a great, wonderful system, but any system, once it starts to get a bit old, it can get stale. And I think having decks like the Gill Tarot, I know it's from the 90s, but having decks that see the tarot differently and bring new things into them or bring new perspectives, whether it's through symbolism or depiction or both, I think is only a positive thing. So ultimately, I went through several different emotional experiences, many of which were conflicting, with the release or re-release of what is my deck. And I'm not relinquishing that. I'm not able to say that it's not my deck, because I feel like it is. I feel like it's still my deck. But now I suppose I'm a little bit okay with it being other people's decks too. So I hope this was a bit of fun. As I said, I didn't genuinely believe that this deck was only for me and nobody else had the right to it. I didn't genuinely believe that people would hate it and, you know, burn it or anything. But these were the little emotional experiences that I had pop up along the way of first finding out that it was coming back in print, and then it came back and was released into the world, and, you know, watching and witnessing people's experiences. I did have some emotions, and I think it's only natural when we care so much about something, when it comes out into the world, whether in a new form or just kind of reborn, whatever. I think it's natural to have certain feelings of attachment to it. So it's been interesting to reflect on my own experience in that regard. But I would love to hear if you were one of the people who picked up a new copy of the Gill Tarot, and what you thought of it, what your experience was. Or if you are one of those people who have a deck that is yours, that is really special to you, that maybe isn't accessible to everybody, whether it's out of print or whatever. And maybe you've had the same experience of it coming back out into wide circulation or whatever. If you've had a similar experience, I would love to know how you reacted. Was it just a simple, cool, it's coming back out, or were there any conflicting emotions? I don't know. It's just been interesting to have a think about my own process with the Gill Tarot coming back out into the world. But that's all from me and the Gill Tarot. We're gonna head off, do a bit of a reading. I hope you're all well, and I'll talk to you next time. So much love. Bye.